So our final speaker for today is our very own Denise Archie. She's actually another founding member of the Yarning Circle with Mark, Martin, Ivan, and myself. She's a joint founder and owner of two multiple award-winning companies, the CEO of the Coaching College. Her expertise in delivering programs around emerging and future women in leadership, coaching team leaders and executives on how to lead a diverse, inclusive, and intergenerational workforce. In 2018, she was inducted as an honorary fellow of the Teachers Guild of New South Wales in recognition for her contribution to education, learning, and people development. More recently, she founded the Academy of Mental Health and Counselling, and I actually call her the serial entrepreneur. She will talk about a fantastic topic that I'm really excited to listen. Not very often in our gender, we actually fix other women's crowns. And her topic for today is how can women champion each other at work? Welcome, Denise.
Thank you to all the other speakers. My head was going crazy with all the stories and my sort of lived experiences. And the two that sort of jump into my head in the beginning of the 90s, I was one of the first women in online learning in Australia. And we built a company and we were flying down to Melbourne. I had a woman business partner at the time. And we were flying to Melbourne to meet with these venture capitalists who wanted to buy our business because we had a name called Training Online. And so this was in 1995, for any of you young enough to remember. So one of the things that we were sitting there and we were offered this incredible amount of money for our name of our business. And, my business partner at the time said, oh, no, we could make, that much money working for us, doing it ourselves. And I had one of the venture capitalists say to me, so who's behind you? And I turned round because I didn't really understand the question. And I said, no one. But we were sort of this anomaly, two women in the technology. And so at this same time, there was a program being released by the federal government of $20 million for any innovation. So we mapped, my background's a primary and high school teacher and a careers advisor. So we mapped 45 careers that would be emerging from the technology industry. And we presented this to the women of the Office of the Status of Women at the time. And as many of you may remember, when Howard came in, he dismantled that within 2 weeks of being in power. Anyway, there was $20 million up for a funding grant. So as I said, we mapped 45 different careers that were possible in this new emerging industry. And we called it Girls Have Got It, information technology. So the $20 million was allocated and we waited. The panel beaters, the construction industry and the spray painters received that allocation. And so for me, this experience of being the lone voice often in the wilderness has really been a big challenge at many times. And I remember being called into the principal's office when I was teaching, and one of the other male teachers accused me of being pushy. And I remember turning around and saying, being pushy, you want to see what pushy looks like? And so I've had many labels put on me. I was the first, only the second ever female in our whole family, generationally, to actually go to tertiary education. And so growing up in a community where it's quite a paternal community within the Jewish community, being an educated, outspoken woman has always been an interesting moment. So, of course, as a mother of 3 sons, they were very immersed into understanding of how do you create equal opportunity. And so when Carla asked me to think about some of the ways to champion women, well, of course, that came to light very quickly. Not only the stories and my personal experience, but how do we actually start to mirror and how do we encourage other people to mirror behaviours? Because we believe that when you're a leader, you actually mirror what's going on that you expect in the workplace. And as a friend of mine recently said, one of the things that she's doing as CEO of her company is that she is building a culture that she would like to have been a part of when she first started working. So I challenge you as I go through my presentation today to think about what culture can you start to influence. We talk about influence, and influence relies on that 80-20 rule. As I said earlier, 80% of what we do in our circle of influence creates 20% of possibility for us. So what does it mean to be a champion? A champion means to actually stand up and speak up and make sure that people around us can demonstrate what we are demonstrating, regardless of our own ability. And so one of the things about being a champion is to actually honour what it is that you're wanting to demonstrate in your workplace. We've heard today about Martin championing the world boxing that he wants to bring for his community, and in 2023. How can you get behind that within your workplace? We heard Rochelle saying, how do we start to demonstrate this within our own workplace? My question to each of you, what does your meetings look like? How are you doing the acknowledgement to country at the start of your meetings? And one of the other things that Vanessa talked about, championing and being the mirror, because you as the leader mirrors back into your own organisation the behaviours that you do with your unconscious bias. So what does being a champion, how can you be that champion? What does an ally mean? Martin talked about being an ally. He said these are the things, he gave us the points about being that. And most importantly, how do you be a friend? How do you actually start to think about what you can do to be that ally? So where have we been? Well, I gave you just a snapshot. Vanessa kindly shared some statistics. Some of those have not changed very much. We've actually seen lots of movements here and there. The Me Too movement, even the suffragettes. If you were studying the history of women, one of the suffragettes and what they had to go through to actually get the vote. I'm reminded of one of the teachers that I taught with many years ago. She started her history. She was an art teacher. And she said, did you know that most history that's taught in schools is about what males have created? There is very little about her story. I remember a little while ago, there was some her story rather than his story. So where have we been? We've been to lots of different pockets. Where can we start to bring this together? Because as leaders in your own circle of influence, in your home, in your work, and in your community, what are some of the things that you personally can start to talk about? What is your lived experience to make it real for every person that you come to? I remember that when I used to talk to people when my children were growing up, and my youngest son would say, who was that? And I go, I don't know. And I was sitting with a friend the other day, we were having lunch, and I was talking to a lady who'd just become a grandparent. And I'm a proud grandma of 6. And I was talking to her and I heard her son say, who was that? And the lady said, I don't know. And so often we have an influence in some ways that we don't even realise. So where are we now? We're now at a point where each one of us can make that incredible difference. We're now at a point where each one of us can really start to think about, where do we sit? What are we mirroring? I know sometimes when we work with workplace health and safety, and I'll say to, CEOs, so where is safety on your agenda? And they say, what do you mean? I say, where is it on your agenda each day? Where is it around your walls? Where is it that says what you're demonstrating and what your beliefs are that you could actually do consciously? Because it's all very well to say, let's do this, but where is it being put around all the walls? I know sometimes, how do we use the ceilings? If you want things to stand out, think about what the marketing in retail do. How often do they move their merchandise? They move it continuously. And then when you go into a shop, you think, oh, this is new stock. No, they've just moved their merchandise. How often do you move the signage that's in your offices to bring it to more people's conscious awareness? Because when something has been there for a very long time, we come blind to it. We want to activate our reticulating activating system. That is to move it to our consciousness. So it's not just a scotoma, it's not a blind spot. When you open the fridge and you're looking for something and you can't see it, it's like walking into a workplace with all the same signage up every day. What signage could you change, or what signage could you put up? So where are you right now? So let's look where you intend to be. What is the ideal workplace for you? Have you taken time to really think about that? What is it, as my friend said, what is the culture that you would like to have been stepped into when you first began working? Because today can be your first day. We have NAIDOC week next week, and I remember working in the women's prison a little while ago with BSI, and we created a Dreamtime Garden. You know, we created something out of nothing, where these women were able to use skills and talents that they didn't even realise that they were part of. You see, I believe every manager is an educator. And so what are we educating every person that we come in touch with to create the sense of possibility? And so for each one of us, we need to be clear about what we intend to be. Because if you think about the word behave, it is to be and to have. And when we think about what we want to be is what we want to have, what are we doing to create that? So the language, what is it that you say to yourself? What is that mind track that Vanessa talked about? What is the language that we use? How do we talk about it in recruitment, in performance management? There's lots of language that's very different. We talk about, you know, when young girls are growing up, my mum, who just turned 91, used to say to my niece, she's very bossy. And my sister and I used to say, no, she's demonstrating leadership. So what is the language that we're saying to ourselves when we are putting ourselves into that space? Lois Frankel talked about why women don't get the corner office, for any of you who may be interested to find that out. And she said the women are her own worst enemies, because what they do is they use language that isn't powerful for themselves. They talk about some of the ways and very quietly speak rather than publicly speak. And how do you stop others from saying, be quiet? You know, someone will say to me, you know, in their language, yes, I hear what you're saying. You know, they're not. They're actually giving me the clues to stop talking. I was working with a female in a coaching business, and she used to do this to her team when she spoke. And so I gave her the instruction that if you open your palm of your hand, regardless of who you are, then you actually are inviting someone to speak. So think about the language, think about the gestures that we make. What is your own unconscious bias? Notice this lady, she's pointing her finger rather than opening the palm of her hand to invite someone to share. So when you stand there, you are actually the leader of whatever meeting you're running. So please assume that position of that leadership. One of the things that we talk about is owning that right to be in front of the group. So what gives you the right to stand there? What is your credibility? What is your brand and reputation? And how do you start to move some of your own unconscious bias? My children warn me that when I hear someone who speaks with an accent, I automatically speak slowly, and I'd never been aware of that before. And they shared with me that that's actually quite rude, which I hadn't realised. I thought by slowing down that I was actually being, you know, make it easier for someone to understand, regardless if they'd been here for 27 years and they still had an accent. So one of the things that we want to be aware of is our own unconscious bias. And what messaging are we sending? How do we sit? See, if you look around the room here, we can actually see the very strong message that we're sending for ourselves. How do we sit and own the space, regardless of when we're standing or sitting? Often we're people say to us, yes, but we're not heard. And I say, well, here's a clue. If you find someone in your team around the place that's talking so much, then start to use some clues so that every time you wish to speak, you pick up something. And what you do, because there's a whole range of peripheral vision that we see clues all the time, you'll start to notice after a while that each time you pick a pen up, someone there who always overtalked you actually stopped speaking. So start to understand what are the messages that you can send in a very subtle way. What are some of the subtle messages that you can give? And where are you sitting at the table? The example gave before of a male then sitting to the female, because they were mirroring that the message that they're sending is really important. How often do you change the seating in your meetings? Because what happens is everyone tends to sit, it's all around change. So if you are to want to change people's perspective, you have to also change the environment in which they're working. So how often do you change the seating at the table? And then someone says, oh, but I always sit there. There's no name on any chairs. So please do yourself a favour, change the seating and the arrangement of where meetings are. I know sometimes when I'm facilitating workshops and I'm given this small space, our meetings always start in a circle, because that way you're building that sense of unity before you even begin. So if you have to have a table, then change the way everyone sits. Not always the head doesn't always have to be at the head. It can actually be at the side. So start to mirror some of the behaviours very, very quickly and how you can influence, because going into a meeting and sitting somewhere different is already starting to influence a change in thinking unconsciously. Mentoring and reverse mentoring. I introduced reverse mentoring last century, and it was a real challenge simply because it was something that was so different. And yet coming into technology, as I said to you, we were one of the first in online learning in Australia, and I had lots of young people working in our business. I always work with young people because they are at the cutting edge of whatever it is that's going to happen next. And I remember one of the young boys coming into my office and saying to me, Denise, guess what? Because he was always on the internet. And I said, what? He said, one day Apple computers will be able to talk to PCs. And I said, really? He said, yes. And the other thing he said was that one day we'll be able to burn information to CDs. Now, what is the wow that's going on in your business? Reverse mentoring is something that's really easy for anyone to demonstrate the power of knowledge of young people, because they all have an ability to share and give information. So, you see, I used to ask my boys, how am I doing as a mum today? Because, you see, I didn't know how I was going to do as a mum tomorrow. Leaders don't often ask their staff, how do you like to be managed when someone comes in? How do you like to be led? Because that gives you the powerful clues of what their expectations are. How do you like to be mentored? How do you like to be coached? Because giving people ownership of how they like things to happen allow you to start to influence their own feelings and their own thoughts towards things. We talked about networking. It's more around strategic networking. Being strategic, who in your organisation is doing whatever it is that you intend to do and have for yourself. How do you start to think about that networking? I used to be involved in a networking group in the city, and one of the things that I found really difficult, and I can talk the leg off a chair, as some of you may already know, and I found it really difficult going into this organisation and into this networking, because it's not part of who I do or who I am. And I said to the owner of this particular chapter, I said, you know what would be really useful? I said, if some of the existing members actually were assigned to new people that came in, I said, because, you know, I'm happy to go and talk to anybody. However, you've got some new people over here, just like me, who aren't so comfortable. So what about you sort of have the list of new people who are coming, and then maybe buddy up with someone that they're going to meet up with on that day? Guess what happened? Nothing. Because it was just too different to what they're talking about. And one of the questions I asked in the chat was around policies and procedures. What policies and procedures would actually work to create more diversity, inclusion, and equity in the workplace? Who have you got making these policies and procedures? I personally don't feel we need something separate, because that's not being inclusive. I think we need people seated around the table to actually create those inclusive policies and procedures. And Rochelle raised an amazing point. Where are the leaders that we want as our future who are creating these policies and procedures? It's not for the now. It's always for the future. So my gift to you, go out, kick up your heels, male, female, ability, disability, because life is about creating the influence of you want to be and have. Thank you.
Thanks, Denise.